kick off. It's great to see so many faces that I haven't seen in a while. I haven't done this physically since 2019. That was the last time that I did a talk in person. So I'm a bit rusty, but I'll see what I can do for you. Let's start with my favourite question, and anybody that's ever worked with me will know that I typically will say, what problem are we trying to solve? Why are we doing this? Let's talk about that. As Ziggy said, I'm pretty old, and a long time ago, I was taught that if you can't measure, you can't control. I know some of you will know this. If you can't control, anyone know what the next one is? You can't manage. Now, I found out recently this is a misquote, right? It's not Edward Deming. It was a misquote. I always thought it was Edward Deming. But when I looked at this and I thought, well, I don't think this suits what we're trying to do with our Agile teams when it comes to data. So I've come up with something I believe is more appropriate, not better, just more appropriate for what we're trying to achieve. I think if you don't measure, you can't improve, which means mediocrity will become your metric. And what I mean by that is you're never going to have a desire to become better. You're going to be happy with just ordinary. And look, some people are happy with ordinary, but not everybody. Anybody run? Anybody doing any running? Hands up the runners in the room? Runners, swimmers, anybody in sort of sports? You probably time yourself for personal bests. Yeah? You've got some idea of how long it takes you to run 100 metres, right? You imagine if you were a runner and you didn't time yourself ever. You'd probably just accept the fact that you're running as fast as you want to. And you'll never get better because you have no data to be able to understand whether you're improving or not. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is when we work with our teams, I believe that if you don't measure, for the right reason, and we'll get into that in a moment, then you're just going to be happy with where you're at. Like call centres. Actually, I should ask, is there anybody in here who works for a call centre? I was on one the other day, it was a 50-minute wait, and I did wonder if they were measuring how long people were having to wait on a call. Yeah, I can see some nodding heads. Yeah, I'm not the only one. Okay, so the focus area for our talk, and I'll start by saying that this is a huge topic. We could probably talk for a whole day on this topic. But we're going to try and be really practical and try and fit in something that will help you take something away and be able to do it tomorrow. So something practical that you can take away and start applying tomorrow. So we're going to keep it pretty simple and try and skim through as much as we can because there is there's a pack that you'll get at the end. You'll be able to deep dive on a lot of topics. So we'll give you some links to information so that if you are that type of person that wants to learn more than you can learn in a 1 hour talk, you can go off and do that. But the key areas for us tonight are how do we capture the right data? How do we know what data to capture? We're going to talk about observing our teams, not just how they perform, but also how they behave when they're being measured, because that happens. We're going to talk about analysing data and how we turn that data, how we understand using systems thinking, we can turn that data into something useful, something we can use. And at the end, Jodi's going to take us through some data-driven action plans. So theory, and then we're going to show you what we actually do every single day so that you can see it's not just what we talk about, we actually do it. Now, a long time ago, a lot of people, I say a lot of people, a few people on LinkedIn who chat to me regularly have said, Nick, how do you cope with more than 20 teams when you've only got 4 coaches? We looked at what we're going to talk about and we thought, actually, that's the name of our framework. It's COPE. Not COAP, okay? It's COPE. This is the name that we use to describe what we do with our teams. We capture, we observe, we analyse, and then we plan. We're going to have ACT on the end, but it makes the thing not work. So, COPE. So I'm sure you've all seen this sort of thing before. You get what you measure. Let's talk about when it's good to measure and then when things go wrong. So helping decision making. And when I talk about helping decision making here, I'm thinking about what information do our teams need to be able to help them make decisions about the work they do. If they're pulling in too much work, what information do they need to help them understand that they're overcommitting and they're not going to get finished? What information do they need to get feedback about reality? Jodi's definitely going to give you some related stories on that one later, because we've actually got to be honest with ourselves, and we've got to be honest, or our teams have got to be honest with themselves about what reality really looks like, instead of just going, yeah, I think I'll be able to finish that. We want to be able to present some data that hopefully is going to inspire some curiosity in our teams so that they will get interested in the data too. So they can see the data and say, well, I wonder why that happened. What was it that that piece of data is telling me that I can go and investigate? I can learn how to investigate it and take that to my team and talk about what we could do about it to improve. And that last bullet point there about metrics and what they should be good for, that driving improvement system-wide is something that we're really passionate about at Sky City. We refuse as a coaching team to do anything in isolation that will create sub-optimization in our teams. I suppose that's just a fancy way of saying we don't want any of our teams to become superheroes and outperform the rest of our teams, because then we'll have a problem. We'll have a team that will cause bottlenecks in everybody else, and those of you who are fans of Kanban will know you can't go any faster than your slowest team. When all of your teams are interconnected and dependent on each other, there's no point in being suboptimal at team level. So when we talk about the data today that we're looking at, my coaching team and I, we do it together. We make sure that the data that we measure is the same across our teams. We focus on that together so we don't create sub-optimization. Kind of a bit of a secret sauce for us. It's something we've always done. And for Todd and Sonali, who used to work in my team, they know this. We worked that same way when they were in the team, and it's the same way we continue to work now. So what about when metrics are bad? Because they can be, and they can cause some real bad problems. Who in this room works with software development and launches products? Cool. Isn't it great when 1 million people download your application? Does that mean 1 million people are using your application? No. So downloads is what we call a vanity metric. When lots of people, 10,000 people go to your website and you've got 10,000 page views, that's a vanity metric. It's a metric that just shows you people are going to your page. What if they bounce off of that page in less than a second? These are not metrics that are actually good for understanding. They're bad metrics. Gaming it is something that we do suffer from, and I'm sure there's lots of people in the room that suffer from this too. This is an actual burn down chart. I won't tell you which team it is. I think I've blurred it out to protect the innocent. Well, they're not so innocent, are they? You can see, and I'm sure you've all seen this before, 1, 2, 3 days out from the end of the sprint, what are the teams doing? Dump the stuff, get it out of the sprint. It's going to ruin our stats. We want 100% completion rate, so just dump it all. That's exactly what's going on there. They think that we can't see it. It says it right there, -5. It says it there and there. And yet they still pretend that it doesn't happen. They game it because, and I think Jodi hears this a lot, oh yeah, but that's going to ruin our stats. That's going to ruin our metrics. Because they're gaming it for the wrong reason. Probably because the metrics become a target. We'll get onto that in just a second. So modified behaviour. That's a police car. I couldn't find a New Zealand one, but it's a police car. Put up your hand when you see this in your rearview mirror. Do you suddenly become the world's best driver? Yeah, 10 to 2. Mirror signal maneuver. I'm being so careful that you probably turn into a bad driver because now you're being super careful, right? That's what happens. It's called the Hawthorne effect. It happens when we start measuring people. So just bear that in mind as we go through tonight's talk. If you don't currently measure, and I know there's a few people that have reached out to me that have said that they're from organisations that don't currently measure within their Agile practice. If you suddenly start introducing this, there is going to be some Hawthorne effect. The way to combat it is to bring your teams with you. Let them know what you're doing. Don't do it behind their backs. Right? They need to be on the journey with you because they need to build trust so that they realise you're not doing it for the wrong reason. You're doing it for them. It's their personal best. It's so that they can measure themselves against themselves. And the last one on this slide is the Goodhart's Law, which is used as a target. When data is used as a target, it can go horribly wrong. The story here for me, the one that I really love, is the Cobra story. Does everybody know the Cobra story? I knew you would. Now, Greg, if you'd like to come up. So the Cobra story is just a very quick story about the British colonial government in India. There was a problem with the number of cobras in the population, so they decided to say, if the people kill the cobras, we'll pay you money for the killed cobra. And for a while, it worked really well, and the level of cobras went down. But then some smart people thought, I could make more money here. I could raise cobras. I could raise them for killing, and then I can kill them and get more money. That's exactly what they did. This is a true story, by the way. But then the British found out. So what do you think they did? All of the people, once they took away the money, they let all the snakes go, making the whole problem worse. Because now there was double the amount of snakes in population that they had in the first place. Because the metric was bad. It was bad metric, Goodhart's Law. There's a lot more to Goodhart's Law and Hawthorne effect, and I encourage you all to go and have a look. I can only touch on it tonight, but definitely worth going. There's links at the back of the pack, so you'll be able to go on deep dive. So, bit of boring stuff while we actually talk about the data. You've probably seen these. These are all of the metrics, not all of them, but most of the ones that we actually capture at Sky City at team level and then at aggregated level. I'm not going to describe them all because then we'd be here more than an hour. But key ones, cycle time, from the moment I start something to when I finish it is very key for us. That tells us a performance metric for our teams and tells them that performance metric too. We want to know sprint completion rate. You're committing to an amount of work, and we want to see if you were able as a team to be able to finish that amount of work that you committed to. WIP, or work in progress, looking at have I started more work than I've actually finished, bad behaviour in some of our teams. And bottom one there, flow efficiency. This is one where we start trying to measure how much waste is in our system, the work in between the work that we do. How much waiting are we doing? When I go to the photocopier, or when I'm waiting for a response from the team because I don't have permission to do something. Surely if I learned how to do it and got the permission, that would remove the waste and I could speed up. So we're starting to measure that one. There's a lot of data that we don't currently measure. So if you're a developer and you're thinking, where are the DORA data? We don't currently measure that. We've only got a couple of teams who are actually DevOps teams. They're just getting up into that space. We're not currently measuring things like defects or number of releases, etc. But we will be. We've started here, and this talk is focused on team performance around process flow and performance at team activity level. But the question really still comes back to, how do I know what to measure? So we're going to get into that now. Anybody like going walking in the woods? Yeah, go out on the walks. There's always lots of paths. This guy's out on a walk. Which way should he go? Should he go left? Should he go right? Hands up if he should go left. Hands up if he should go right. What information did you base that decision on? He likes waterfalls. If he knew that the waterfall, or a waterfall, was at the end of this path, which path would he take? The one with the waterfall, right? Because he knows what he wants. He knows what he wants. He knows what he wants to achieve. He knows what he wants to see. If you know what you want, it makes it really easy to get it. It's if you don't know what you want that you get lost. And that's really key when you start looking at data and what you should be capturing. What problem? We're back to it again. What problem are you actually trying to solve? Because that's going to help you understand what data to collect. Here are some typical things that you will probably have been asked or have been asking yourself. How do we show the value of Agile coaching? How do we do that? What metrics, what data do I need for that? What's causing poor morale? What should our next maturity step be? These are all questions that have been asked at some point at Sky City, either by myself, my team, my leadership team. This is where we start. This is where I suggest you start. Start listing out your questions first, and then follow what we're going to do next. So before I put the problems back up, we're just going to have a quick chat about 4 different types of data. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. Descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive. So descriptive data is all about what happened. It's stuff that I can easily measure. It's stuff that just happened, and I can capture it. And it's what 80% of studies across the world are based on. It's that foundation of data that we all do our reports off of. It's descriptive data. But then we could go into diagnostic data. Diagnostic data builds on descriptive and allows us to start to think about, well, why did that happen? What caused it to happen? Once we get to that point, we can start to think about, well, what will happen next? How do I take what happened and why it happened and understand and do some analysis so I can figure out what will happen next? And then prescriptive is, well, now I know where I want to get to. What do I need to do to get there? What are those prescriptive actions that I need to take to be able to reach that next phase? So I'm going to put the questions up now, and I'm going to throw it over to you just for a bit of interaction. Let's start with this one here. Oh, I've got a laser pointer, I can do this. We need a performance baseline for our teams. Who's brave enough to suggest what type of data would you capture to get a baseline for your teams? What do you think?
Descriptive.
Descriptive, absolutely. Descriptive. What just happened? I need a baseline. Tell me what just happened. Let's collect that data. Doesn't matter what it looks like, that's our baseline. So now we've got that baseline. How do we know what's causing poor team morale? Diagnostic, absolutely. And the last example here, how do we show the value of Agile coaching? What do you think that one might be? It's pretty straightforward when you put it out on the screen like this. When I built this slide out, it took a few iterations. I was trying to get across what we've done and how we've done it, and the thinking that we went through. And thank you for interacting, saying hopefully what I thought you were going to say, because it's not necessarily complex. You just have to actually do it. So, when do you collect this data? Descriptive data at Sky City, we collect this at the end of every sprint. So this is a screenshot of our work management system called Azure DevOps. Doesn't have to be Azure DevOps, could be any other work management system you use. But we take a screenshot of the information and we capture that into good old Excel. Yes, we still use Excel because we need to. But that's the descriptive, that gets us our baseline. Now we've been doing this religiously for 3 years now. So we've got about 3 years worth of data. It's over 15,000 data points. And it's been revolutionary for us to be able to see what our teams are doing and start to use it for diagnostic and predictive. When's a good time to do diagnostic? When's a good time to do analysis and figure out why things happen? Is it? When something changes, yeah. There's no right or wrong answer to this. I put up retrospective because, hey, it's a team event. Most teams do it. Kanban teams do it too. That's a great place to start introducing your teams to the data and saying, hey teams, here's a mirror that I'm showing you about the data that we pulled from your team from last sprint, and this is what it's showing us. Let's talk it through. Let's try and understand what caused this. Do it with your teams. Let them realise you're not measuring them to then sneak off to the leadership team and say, look how bad they're doing. This is actually, they should never feel like that. You should share and make transparent all of the data so that they know that it's actually for their benefit. It's for them to understand how to improve their team performance. So let's think about predictive. How could we do that sort of thinking? So a little bit grey in this one. Here's what we do at Sky City. That data that I talked about that we put into our spreadsheets, and we've also started to do quite a bit of charting, allows us to take that data and start to plot it out over future sprints and start to see if any patterns emerge. So we're looking for deviations from where maybe a team has started to start more work than they finish, and we start to see these two lines start to drift away from each other. If we stopped here and we didn't take it out further, because we hadn't mapped out all of these future sprints, we wouldn't see the problem at that sprint there. We actually have to map it out to start seeing whether that line is going to deviate, to start knowing whether we need to put some prescriptive behaviours in. And then we have some other charts that we capture at team level that allow us to start seeing trends and start being able to spot anything that's going outside of the norm of what we expect to see for that particular team. Now, what could we build to get us to prescriptive? So we did have to build a set of tools. Nothing special, you can build them too. So some of them I just showed on the previous slide, and it's an amalgamation of the descriptive, the diagnostic, the predictive to get us to the prescriptive, predictive to get us to prescriptive. And what you can see here is the data that we collect plus the observation. So if you remember back to what I said at the start with the COPE framework, we do a lot of observing with our teams. We use our eyes, we use our ears, and we collect that information too. Right? It's not just numbers, it's what we see, it's what we hear. So we have a database tool that we use where we capture observational information daily about our teams that we can share with each other, and we can use that together with this data to work out a strategy to get that team to where they want to be. Not necessarily where we want them to be, it's where they want to be. When we coach teams, if we've got a really strong view of what good Agile looks like, that could be like all the way over here. That might not be where a team is ready to get to. So we're just coaching them for maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead, not right the way down the line. We'll get there eventually, but it's a slow game. It takes a while. I've been at Sky City 6 years now, and it's taken a while. It's a slow, but I think that when you do it that way, it sticks. When you take that small incremental approach, doing lots of little experiments, it sticks. Do you have to be a maths genius to do this? Those of you who know me from the past know that I am not great at maths. It is not my strong suit. I like process. Data, if you'd have told me 20 years ago I'd be stood up here doing a talk about data, I told you were crazy. You don't need to be a maths expert, okay? These are the only real things you need to know. The mode, the frequency. How often do I see this number? Things like, what's the most frequent story point? What's the most frequent score that I see for sprint completion? How often does it come up? Something like median or middle is just the number that's in the middle. So if you've got low performing teams and high performing teams, what's the one that's in the middle? Sometimes you need to know that so you can build a chart out of it. Percentiles, I'm not great with percentiles. This is why calculator.net is my friend. I use the percentage calculator at calculator.net all the time, and I'm not afraid to tell you it, because it helps me to get some of the charts that we do so I can visualize the data and be able to show at a portfolio level to my leadership team what some of those percentages look like, whether it's percentage of new, active, closed work at a portfolio level or something else that we need to tell a story about. Standard deviations, we use those to be able to tell how predictive a team is. So if we're looking at something like cycle time, the standard deviation that is outside of the standard would be very spiky. We see lots of standard deviation outside of the usual predictive line that we would see when tracking over time. We want to find out why that's happening. What's suddenly gone wrong with that team that they are no longer being predictive? Lots of different reasons, no way of knowing, no way to know until you go and observe. I don't think I need to describe minimums and maximums. I mean, it's just highs and lows. And normal distribution versus skewed distribution, just a charting method at the bottom. I've never had to use it, so in the interest of time, I'm not even going to talk about it. Hands up who's ever done a chart with normal versus skewed. Not the yes, good, at least one or two? Okay. What tools do you need? So you don't need to be a maths genius, but what tools do you need to be able to do what we've done at Sky City? You could do it all with paper and pen, absolutely, you could do, but it would take a really long time and you wouldn't be able to share it very well. So yes, we do use Excel. We do also use Excel with a work management tool. Agile DevOps users in the room, hands up. Got Jira users in the room. Monday.com users in the room. Not a single one. Asana? Jira? It's you all, Jira and Agile DevOps. Is there anybody who's using a weird one? Something new? JetBrains' new track teams thing? No?
Teams tasks.
Which one?
Teams tasks.
Teams tasks. Nice. I did play with it. It's not bad. You definitely need, I mean, look, you don't need one, but actually it would just consume more time if you didn't have one. We're using the tools to obviously help us to get the data in a more automated manner so that we can use our brains for something a little bit more valuable. Use your eyeballs, observe your teams, go watch them, go listen to them, use your ears, listen to the interactions, listen to whether they trust each other, listen to how they react to news that comes into the sprint, mid-sprint, what are they doing? We write that down. We take on Notepad, whether it's paper, we use digital. Notion fans in the house? Nice to see I converted you. It's all my fault.
Yeah.
We use a digital pad with digital notes so that we can share them. That's why, because we want to go on holiday at some point, and at that point I might want to go and observe somebody's team. So I'm going to take notes in our online system. Better for sharing. But it's really important, and I know Jodi's going to touch on that later, so I'm not going to steal her thunder on how important that is. That is not a tool that I use for this job. No. Sure, you can have a play with it, but that's the last tool that I use, my brain. I use the information that I gather, and I use that to try and start to understand what I'm seeing. So at a team level, some of this information that we've put together, and this is a real screenshot of a dashboard at Sky City, we work with the team, like I said earlier. It's really important to bring them on the journey. Hopefully there's nobody from this team in the room. All of our dashboards are slightly different. They used to all be the same. But we decided to talk to our teams and find out what they wanted to see, find out what they wanted to improve on. So their data is all slightly different, how it's displayed and what we show. It's typically those sort of things. It's typically average velocity. It's typically finished versus unfinished stories, story count, sprint goals. And some of them have started doing this thing called word of the sprint, which is where when you finish a piece of work, there's a fun word that you can say and call it out and shout it out. Whether you shout it out on Teams or you shout it out loud. Funny story, I think this is your team. When Jodi first joined, the team didn't tell her what the word of the sprint was. The word of the sprint was, I don't know. So she's coaching her first session. I hope you don't mind me telling that story. She's coaching her first session, and I think they were at sprint review, and she was asking, so can we close this story? And the entire team went, I don't know. And she's like, well, why don't you know? I'm like, you know what? We don't know. Can we close the story? I don't know. And it just kept going round and round and round. It's fun. There's a little bit of fun. As you can see, this team did a nice one stew that particular sprint. You can have a bit of fun with it. At a portfolio level, we do a lot of stuff with the standard data from Azure DevOps, so typical stuff. You've probably got it in Jira too. Portfolio Kanban board. It shows my leadership team projects that are active, projects that are coming, projects that are being analysed, projects that are still looking for funding, and then projects that are finished. We've got financials. Obviously, I've obfuscated them. Can't show you that, but we have that in there. Again, sorry, I had to blur this one out, but this is a dashboard of our portfolio view. So we have a work stream or a swim lane for hospitality, gaming, etc. And it gives information not only about performance, but also about data, financials as well. And of course, our annual plan, that's all digital as well, although we start out physically on a whiteboard, like probably most of you, and then it moves into Azure DevOps so it's shareable with everyone. But the one that's the most enjoyable one that I like sharing with my leadership team is this one. This one comes out once every 6 months and then again annually, and this is the aggregated picture of what's going on. We take all of that data from all of our teams, and we aggregate it right up to the portfolio level so that I can talk to my leadership team about what's happening at ICT as a department. And it's an interesting story. I can start to see some really interesting things here. I know you probably can't see it, but I can actually see when our quarterly planning is occurring because there's little blips in the backlog. They suddenly grow. Here, I can see that we started an experiment for our flow efficiency back here. And I can see that we did an improvement and then we've kind of plateaued. Probably because we got to where we wanted to get to for that particular year, and then we're starting again. This one here tells me that our running velocity has now got to the point where our teams are pretty much running as fast as they can with the way that they work right now. The only way they're going to go faster is if we get more teams, automation, more waste out, things that we don't currently do a lot of. This is as fast as humanly possible that they're going to go without something new. I won't steal Jodi's thunder on this one. There is a trend there. I know she's going to talk about it later, but that is showing us the planned work versus how much work we got finished as a department. Cycle time, nice and predictable, very smooth. Little deviation here, probably something happened there. Might have been, I don't know what it was holidays. So it's annual, it's Christmas. This tells me whether we're doing user stories at the right size. Is our work right size to be able to fit it into a 2-week sprint? We run 10-day sprints. So obviously if that number goes outside of that, us coaches need to do something about it. And this one's backlog size, and I'm sure this is familiar to all of you. It just keeps getting bigger, and it's not stopping. And of course, with all that data, we can do some fun stuff too. We can get some infographics going. We can start putting some fun stuff together and just putting it out there and sharing with everybody so they can all feel part of it. Now we're going to move into the part where we do the analysis. I'm going to do a time check to see how I'm doing. Now I'm going to go quite fast through this because I do want Jodi to have some time to talk about her teams. So again, remember you are going to get some information after this. Before we get into the systems thinking part, I just wanted to remind everybody in the room that we work in complex adaptive systems, all of us do, because they're all human-based. And while you're doing that, when you start thinking about measuring teams, you need to recognize that your teams are like improvising jazz bands, right? Yeah, they'll be playing a tune and then all of a sudden it will change. Something will emerge. Somebody will play a note. Maybe they'll play a wrong note. And off the back of that one wrong note, something will emerge. A new melody, a new behavior, something different. You have to bear that in mind. And as coaches, that's why it's important that we observe. They're going to adapt. When something changes, your team will start to adapt, just like birds do when the wind changes direction. You've all seen it. They all start to move about. Again, really important that we remember that this is going to happen. Your teams are going to react when you start measuring them and when you start showing them the data. They're going to start adapting. Hopefully in a good way, not in a gaming way. Some teams will, some teams won't. Depends on what they're trying to achieve and what they're made up like. And non-linear dynamics, I think of it as the butterfly effect. You can make one small change, which make a big impact over here. So when you make your changes with your teams, make sure you don't do one experiment every 3 days because you'll get lost. It'll be like ripples in a pond. When you drop one pebble in, you get those ripples that occur. You throw 6 in, they all start cancelling each other out. So just take it slow, do small experiments to get big results. I think of data like levers. I did get Bing or Dali to create this. It had a real tough job trying to create me levers connected to a desk. That's the best I could do, or that's the best it could do. All of your data is going to be connected. So when you make change to one, it will affect others. Think about your data holistically. I said it before, think about it as a team. Don't try and do things in isolation. Think about talking to your coaching team about which data you want to make a change to. I like these sort of mechanisms. But when you pull a lever, other things are going to happen elsewhere. And you might not know unless you've done the work to try and understand what's going to happen elsewhere. So think about what happens when I pull this lever. You can do the analysis. That's what we're going to talk about next. How do we figure out what lever to pull? That's where causal loops comes in. So this is a technique from systems thinking. They call data variables. They model them like this. Here's 2 variables that we've already talked about: team size and team work in progress. All we need to do to get started, and it isn't a particularly hard technique, but you do need to set aside some time to be able to do it. And I suggest you do it with your team in front of a whiteboard. Start modelling out the data that you either collect or that you want to collect. Start linking data together that you think has a relationship with each other. And it could be that it has a relationship back the other way, creating a feedback loop. At this point, we want to work out what type of loop this is. It's either going to be the same loop or an opposite loop. And when you go out and look at this on the internet, you'll see some modelling uses S and O, some use a plus and a minus. They both mean the same things. So S would be a plus, minus would be the O. And what we're saying here is, if I've got more of this, I'll get more of that. And if I get more of this, I'll get more of this. And it'll go round in a reinforcing relationship. So same. Talk about that one in a sec. It's a reinforcing relationship. And these 2 lines are the only other shape you need to know about. This means there's a delay. So it's not instantaneous. So when I increase team size, it doesn't automatically mean that the whip is going to instantaneously increase. There's going to be a delay. This is ours. Now I know you're all going to grab your cameras and you're all going to take a photo. Please do, it's fine. Just remember, takeaway for you is this is our causal loop diagram. This is modelled on the behaviours within our complex adaptive system, not yours. Yours will probably be different. This is ours. But sure, look back over it so that you can use it for inspiration if it helps. I'm just going to take you through a couple. I'm not going to go through all of them, just so you can understand what we use this for. So let's go back to our old friends, team size and width. I'm just going to read out to you what I've set up here. An increase in team size will empirically, because we've got the data, we collected it over the last 3 years, will empirically increase the team width, because there are suddenly more team members. An increase in team width can cause the decision to increase the team size to meet the new width level. This creates an unhealthy reinforcing relationship that cannot be sustained. Typically, this will lead to splitting that team into multiple smaller teams, or they'll ignore you and go into become a monster team, which of course makes it hard to be able to communicate and build close relationships, and things will probably end up causing performance problems. So again, we're starting to get into this predictive way of thinking because we're understanding how the data relates to each other. That's a reinforcing relationship. They're not all unhealthy. That one is. In our world, it might not be in yours. Let's take a look at a balancing relationship. So here I've got the sprint completion rate and sprint scope creep. An increase in scope creep will cause a decrease in the predictability of the sprint team to complete what they committed to. So scope creep's gone up, the ability for the team to complete their sprint has gone down. This predictability reduction drives the team to actually reduce their scope creep, do something about it, get better at it. This reduced scope creep then improves the predictability, creating a balancing loop. One went up, one went down, and then it balances itself over time. It'll just keep going until emergence occurs and something changes and we have to update our model, which is why it's so important to keep observing our team's behaviours. Not going to read that out, but I just wanted to show you we did a lot of analysis here. We went through all of the relationships, the causal loops, between all of the variables to understand if I pull this lever, what happens over here? If I pull that lever, what happens over here? It starts to tell me what behaviours I'm going to see when I pull levers so that I can start helping teams to get to a predictive state. And the last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand over to Jodi is pattern recognition. We can only do this because of the data. I can now look at one of our charts and I can quite easily see Christmas, Christmas, Christmas. Easter, Easter, Easter. I'm looking at this, I feel like I'm in the Matrix, you know, when all the things come down. I'm now reading charts and can tell the stories. We also get sudden dips because of system problems, incidents, staff churn, when somebody comes in, somebody leaves, there's always a blip. We can now see these blips and explain them in data to our leadership teams. Backlog size, etc. This one's telling me something's going wrong with this team, I need to go and investigate because it looks like they're starting more work than they're actually finishing because the whip wedge is starting to occur. So we're going to go and get in there and coach that team, find out what's going on and help them to avert that. We also do use Little's Law a bit with some of our teams. For those of you not familiar, again, there'll be something in the pack. This just allows us to work with teams with some basic data to calculate what is the optimal width, what is the optimal amount of data, sorry, the optimal amount of work items that the team should be pulling in based on what they are pulling in. It's a very simple calculation if you're collecting the right data. It's just throughput and it's response time. Throughput and response time, put those together, you get your WIP. Like I say, the calculation and how to do it is in the pack. Something to look into if you haven't looked into Little's Law yet. Okay, that's all the theory. Now, does it work? That's what Jodi's going to talk about. She's going to give you some real-world examples of how she's taken all of this theory and applied it to teams that she coaches through.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to talk through the process that I use to help. I need three.
You need three.
That we use to help our teams grow and become more mature at using data. Teams know we capture data, as Nick mentioned earlier. And one of the key things that I make sure that I do in my coaching is I make sure the teams know that I coach for reality, not for what we actually have going on. So what I mean by that is when my teams are interacting and doing the things that they do best, it's all about the values and the principles that we have in our Agile ways of working over being able to have behaviour based on metrics. And I often get scenarios where a team member says, I've got this story, what do I do with it, coach? Where am I going to put it? I don't want to upset our sprint data like Nick mentioned earlier. And for me, it's one story in the grand scheme of all of those stories that are being delivered across all those teams in ICT. Nobody in a leadership team is going to know that that one person carried a story from one sprint to the next sprint. So my advice to my teams is always, make your sprints reflect reality. What is it that you're actually doing? If you're truly blocked on something and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to unlock that story, trade that story for something that you can work on and you can deliver in your sprint. And interestingly, in coaching that recently, I've actually been able to see over a series of sprints that my teams are impacting their sprint completion rates with the trading of stories, because the data is looking at what was planned versus what was actually got through to done. But ultimately, it's about what they actually have done in reality and making that real. And over time, that's probably the key thing with data. It's about your data over time gives you your trends and your patterns and your information through that actually makes the big difference about everything that you do with your teams and helping them to have the information they need. So, what do we do? Let's run the right way. As Nick mentioned, we capture the data sprint by sprint. Then we get into the really key part of face-to-face observations. So we document our observations, and it's in a private wiki, and only the coaches can get in and have a look at it. So as coaches, we're really free to write the facts down of what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're observing in our behaviours. And that allows us to then create these neutral observations. So when we're in observation mode, we're not thinking what is the problem that's happening in front of me. I'm writing down who said what. I'm writing down who did what. Or I'm writing down what the process was that the team was actually following. What did they talk about? How did they talk about it? How rich was the conversation? And through that, that allows me to see the ongoing trends of the observations that I'm seeing in that team that really focuses me on the key problems or the key opportunities for improvement that each of the teams I'm coaching actually have. So I take these observations, and sometimes I do the analysis first, and I'm looking at data first. Sometimes I'm actually doing the observations and then going to the data second. But ultimately what it's about building that story up. What does the observations tell me? What does the data tell me? How do I build a picture that allows me to create a hypothesis and then validate it one way or the other, either through observations or through the data that I actually see for that team. So then once I've done my analysis and I've got some theories and I think I've worked out what am I going to do, I develop a plan. And I think to myself, okay, how am I going to help the team to create a learning environment to understand there's something here that they need to maybe have an opportunity to do differently, or to make that data transparent so that they can, work through that process. And I think for me, coming to Sky City 9 months ago, the power of documented observation for me has been amazing in my ability to be able to focus on the right problems, be really deliberate about the observations that I'm seeing, and give perspective to truly understand what's actually going on and what I'm seeing in my teams. And it gives us a really good advantage to be able to step back and take my emotions out of it, to be able to actually just see what I'm seeing in front of me. So I'm going to talk through some examples around that, which hopefully will give you some really key things around some of the processes that I've been through and the learning that I've been through with some of the teams that I coach. So in the format, I'm going to describe the problem that I observed or that I thought, and then I'm going to talk to you about the key data that I would look at. What levers did I have? What was I seeing in the data from the levers? What were the trends that I was observing? So what were the behaviours that were going with the data? And then I'll talk to you about the plans that are made around each of them. So, in this one, team number 1. So what you can see here is there was a trend around over-planning. So what you can see in the starting scope, just stories to done, which is the sections there in bold. So you can see that the stories to done were lower than the planned stories. The colours here on the sprint completion chart. So the red represents less than 80% complete. The green represents 90% and above complete. And the orange is 80 to 90%. So I'm going to use those same colouring throughout each of the 3 examples I'm going to share with you tonight. But I'll remind you each time about what the colours represent. So what I did was I saw this data and I analysed some graphs. And when you look at the first graph there, that's a standard graph that many of us coaches and Scrum Masters have looked at. Planning is higher than finished. But also there was a really interesting curve over time on their story point velocity where their actuals to done, and the done was actually spiking and troughing. So you can actually see that with the red, green, red, green, red, green. I went, that's really interesting. What's actually going on here? So I went and observed and had a bit of a chat to a few people in the team. And the first observation I had is this team has a very high vendor dependency. So there's a whole lot of work being farmed off to a black box for a vendor, and then this team has to implement that thing that's coming back from our vendor. This is a clear observation of over-planning, and sitting in the planning meetings with this team, it was absolutely obvious that there was over-planning going on. Now, here's the interesting part of what I was observing with this team as well. They are really disciplined about using their own data. So they would talk about their velocity and refinement, getting ready for what they were thinking might be coming up next. They're really disciplined about looking at their velocity in their planning meetings. They were using their burn down charts every single day, but they were still having this over-planning thing kind of going on. So we've talked about it a lot within the team. They continue to have a data focus and they're making slow progress forward with this. Ultimately, they're all wanting to do the best that they can do, right? Everybody gets out of bed every day to do the best that they can do. And this team certainly stands true with that. Then as a coaching team, we started looking through this over-planning. And you remember one of the slides that Nick alluded to for all of ICT. What we recognised was that it was a very common problem that we had across not all of our teams, but many of our teams are over-planning on a regular basis, not finishing what they plan. So we've actually taken that a step further as a coaching team, and we've all signed up for a KPI this year to get our teams to be an average of 80% across all of their sprint completion rates across the year. So we're going to have to do some very careful coaching and some very good planning around how we plan to help our teams to actually get that. And I remember a conversation with Nick probably a couple of months ago now, Nick, I think, where we said how many broken promises are we actually not delivering on across ICT? You know, how big is this problem actually? Is there a whole lot of broken promises that we're having here? And it's probably not as extreme as you would imagine thinking about those kinds of numbers, but it was a really good example for us that actually led to us to bring it into a bigger strategy than just my coaching team strategies or the team strategy itself. So the next team I want to talk to you about. Now this is a really interesting scenario. Now I really wanted to share this story with you guys because this is a team that defies the odds. So you know how we're talking about the causal loops and the relationships between the data? So if we look at this particular team, you can see, again, the key thing I will call out is the work in progress per person column here. What per person I'll call it, if you don't mind, rather than me tongue twisting myself constantly. You can see those numbers are pretty high. Now generally work in progress per person, we tend to see that if it's higher than 2, our sprint completion rates are a lot lower and they start dropping down. So remembering that red is less than 80% complete, green is 90% and above, and orange is 80 to 90%. Now the other interesting thing about this team, Nick talked about the scope piece, right? So if we look at this one here, this is where we're bringing extra work into the sprint, highlighted here in light blue. But if you again, so work in progress is about 6 to 7 work items per person throughout the sprint. So really interesting kind of pattern considering how much green is over here in our sprint completion rates. I started scratching my head a little bit around this. That's really interesting. So I've got some burn downs. So I picked line 14 here to show you some burn down charts and some velocity charts for this particular team. And you can see, and I've actually picked one of the worst sprints on purpose to demonstrate the line. You can see this team is still relatively tracking down on their sprint burn down. And you can see that their velocity is relatively predictable when you look about plan versus what they're actually delivering. I'm like, it's even more interesting. So what is it about work in this team that makes this team defy the odds? So I went on a little bit of a journey and I did a bit more observation, scratched my head a little bit more and I talked to the team. And this team has a reasonable amount of time-bound work. So this is where they start the work in the first week of the sprint, and they have to wait for the second week of the sprint to be able to take something through to production or do a release or something like that. The other thing I observed was they've got lots of questions that kind of go backwards and forwards throughout the sprint. So there's a bit of wait time. So we start a piece of work, we need a bit more info, so they get some more information back. The story completes within the 2-week time period, but there's just a bit of wait in the middle. And then the third thing I discovered was they have a bunch of related work kind of things. Now the stories are sliced right, and then there's stories of value, and they all deliver value in their own right. But there's a whole lot of efficiencies that the team found that they were doing by doing those pieces of work together. So related tasks, different stories, doing those work, and then the stories would all finish together at the end. So it was a really good reason for why work in progress per person was higher. Really good example about sometimes actually, the lesson I learned from this is that you need to build your full picture, capturing the data, observing, analysing, before you create a plan for making any kind of improvement or change. Over just looking at a piece of data in isolation and going, right, I have to fix that problem. There's a problem in that piece of data. Well, actually, there isn't a problem in that piece of data. It's a conversation I regularly have with the team and say, hey guys, this is where your number's sitting at. Does that still feel about right? So that's the team that defies all the odds. Now, I'm conscious of time. We're a few minutes over. I've probably got about another 5 minutes, and then we've got 5 minutes to wind up. If everyone can stay a little bit longer. If you need to leave, please feel free to leave the room, no problem. Okay, so the third term I want to share, and this is a really interesting one. The data looked okay. The team was getting stuff done. They were getting their stories finished off. Maybe there's a little bit of gaming going on, but we are in the entertainment industry after all. So you could assume this team was performing. And I went to a couple of events. In fact, I went to quite a few of their events actually, and I was observing them. And at the point of the orange line going across the screen, I summarised up some of the observations I'd been seeing. And what I'm sharing with you here is the actual excerpt from the email that I sent to the lead of that team, summarising up our conversation around, hey, these are the observations that I've had. So obviously I've scrubbed it a little bit, but I'd gone to the point of, and what I did with this was a little bit different to what I'd done with some of my other teams, because when I was observing in their events, they were all tangled, is the only way to describe it. So what I did was I actually made the observations and I stuck them on visualised them, wrote them out on post-it notes and stuck them on the wall. Nobody knew what team they were for or where they'd come from. They were neutral enough that I could leave them visualised next to my desk. And I ruminated on it for about 2, 3, 4 weeks. And I looked at it, I was like, what am I actually seeing here? What's the relationship between these observations that I'm actually seeing? What's actually going on? And it really helped me to step back enough to play the ball, not the person. You know, for me, it was about how can I help this team as a whole? There isn't a particular individual here that's not doing what they need to do. Let's come at it from a place of helping the team to move forward. So I understood the problem well and enabled me to focus on what the team was doing really, really well. It allowed me to give the facts and talk to the team about the facts of what I had observed. I have seen this. When you do this, this is what happens. And from there, it really helped me to create a rapport, particularly with the tech lead, the tech lead of the team. They had to lead through helping the team to understand where they were at. And so we stepped back and we made a plan. And that's where our strategy came in. And the thing with this one in particular was that the underlying objective that the tech lead and I were shooting for was laughter and humour into the team. And it was about engagement with the team. And the result, which I'm really proud to be able to share with you guys tonight, they've adjusted all their events, they're engaged, they drive their own retrospective actions, which was one of the things for me. Actions and retrospectives are hard, right? So as a coach, the fact that they now put the actions up without me prompting them very much, create the space, that for me shows the engagement that they actually have in the team. And in the stats up here, you can actually see the last 5 sprints over here, their sprint completion rates have rocketed above 80%. So for me, that's one of my favourite little success stories, and I'm really pleased to be able to share that with you tonight. So Nick's going to jump up now and share some takeaways with you.
Is that Chinese? Hey, listen, thank you so much for being patient. I know we've gone over a little bit. It's great to see so many of you still sitting there and still listening. Thank you. Takeaways. I'll get this done really quickly. Obviously, they're up on the screen. You can read them. But just to really ram home there that understanding the problem you're trying to solve, knowing the why, is really going to help you to collect the right data. Up in your maths game a little bit. If you're like me, you need just to understand a little bit more about maths. Understanding those causal relationships. It's a really interesting tool to get into. Do it with your team. Learn how to observe it. Learn how to work out those relationships. You can all reach me on LinkedIn if you need a hand. You know where I am. And recognise that it's really important to do the capture, observe, analyse before planning. Jodi made it really clear there. It's a really big takeaway. But we could quite easily have seen that data and done the wrong plan, and it would have given us the wrong result. So because we waited until the plan, after doing the analysis, that's key. And use your data to target your coaching actions, right? So it's not all data, gut, observation data. So some big takeaways there. Like I say, I'm going to give you the slides. There's a little, if you flip on to the next one, Jodi. Included this, so you just know what we've been reading, what we've been studying over the last couple of years, so you can go read the same books that we have, go to the same resources we do. There's links to all of this in the pack that we'll send out in PDF once we've sanitised all our speaker notes out of it, of course. And then we'll just open it up at the end just to say, hey, if you haven't validated your parking yet, if you did park here and shoes at the back, please do. It's a nice discount off your parking. And we're here for any questions if anybody has any you want to ask at the end. I realise it's over time, so quite happy to receive those questions electronically if you want to send them afterwards. All right, and so last thing I want to say is again, thank you to Sky City for providing us with such a wonderful place to have a chat, have a talk. Chandeliers, I love it. Fantastic. And thank you to Ziggy and for helping us set up and just giving us the opportunity to share this information with you. Thank you all.